franchise. You have spent much of your career in business, in the family cigar business, which grew from a tobacco shop on Walnut Street back in the 1800s to a multi-billion-dollar company that was sold in 2007, I believe. Fortunately for Philadelphia, that's given you a little more time to focus on the Phillies and also on philanthropy. So we're going to talk about all these things, but before we get to that, this has been a fall filled with surprises of all kinds. One of them was the Cubs winning the World Series after 108 years.
When people ask me before the postseason started what I would think of as the best World Series possible, I said it's an Indians-Cubs World Series. You have the two teams that have gone the longest without winning the World Series. Cubs were 108, and the Indians were 68 years. And so I thought it was, and you also have kind of a small market team in Cleveland with one of the two or three biggest, I should say, not best, biggest market teams in the Cubs. So there's a lot of interesting forces at play. And I thought it was a great World Series. I thought it was extraordinary what the Indians did coming back late in the seventh game. I know the owners of both teams well. I'm thrilled for the Ricketts of the Cubs, and Tom Ricketts in particular. I know how Cleveland feels. I experienced the Cubs thrill in a way, but I experienced the agony of in 09 of what the Indians are doing. And frankly, have been up 3-1 and lose was even worse, harder than what we endured in 09.
Well, let's talk a little more about this. So describe, if you can, the thrill of 08, just what it was like to finally see this happen.
So one of the things that's interesting when you go through a postseason, October of 2008, I could barely breathe. Because you're sitting there, you need 3 outs, and then you need 2 outs, and then there's a man on second, and then there's this sharply hit ball to the outfield, and that turned into the second out. That would have been the run if Jason hadn't been able to get to the ball. And and when the Brad so loud, you couldn't even hear the ball hitting the bat. So he threw the pitch, Hinsky swung. I'm looking at fielders trying to see what their reaction is, to see whether somebody's running to a spot to try to field the ball. I don't see the fielders moving, and this is all happening in literally a nanosecond. And then I see Carlos start to move, and I'm thinking, oh man, he dropped the ball, so, and it's a foul tip or something like that. And then all of that. I had an outfit that I wore to the first game in 08, and we won. And not surprisingly, that became my outfit. And then we lost. Eventually, we lost a game, and I would wear a different outfit, and we won. So I'd have like 2 or 3 outfits that I changed between me. And when you start playing in early October and you go until late October, the weather's very different. So I was sitting there in late October with a polo shirt on, a golf shirt, short-sleeve golf shirt, and a lightweight blue blazer. And I was absolutely frozen. That was so cold that fifth game, both the original part of the fifth game and then the concluding 3 innings. I literally was hugging the hot dog warmer between innings, trying to keep myself from getting too cold. And people have images. People were there sitting with me, said, "We saw images of you hugging with this thing like this, trying to get warm."
So I think one of the things people are curious about with the owner of any sports franchise is, what is that job? How involved are you on a day-to-day basis? What kind of decisions are you involved with? What do you delegate and let the folks handle?
Well, there's 30 baseball teams, and they're not run the same way. So there are some owners who that is their job. They show up to work at 8 o'clock in the morning, and they leave at 6 o'clock at night, and they do that 5, 6, 7 days a week. There are others who are at the other extreme who are absentee owners, and there's fewer of those today than there were in the past. And we're kind of in the middle. We get involved in decisions. Andy runs the team on a day-to-day basis. He's the president. He makes the majority of decisions along with his key staff. Matt Flintack, obviously, on the baseball side, and then on the business side, there are other people. We're informed of all important decisions, and sometimes we're informed at the time the decision is made. For example, or a little bit before, we knew about the trade with Kendrick with the Dodgers for Kendrick before it happened. We knew they were contemplating it. We understood who we were giving up and whatnot. Other decisions were informed much earlier in the process because they're bigger. So when we looked at trading Ken Giles or Cole Hamels, we were involved for weeks with that decision. understanding the different, the bank. Because there's a lot of.
So are you weighing in, saying this is a good idea, this is a bad idea, or are you just?
Well, you have to be careful in the sense that I think it's important to understand what your limitations are as a person. There's knowledge, there's technical knowledge in every industry. The key technical knowledge that's part of your critical success factors in baseball is the ability to evaluate talent. And you don't learn that by managing a hotel company or a cigar company. It takes years and years. So we're not going to stand and say to Andy or Matt, no, you're not going to do that. We tell them to run the team as they need to run the team in order to win. And their job is to tell us what they need to do to improve the team, to both today and in the long run, and do better. Our job is then to help them find the financial resources to do that. But we want to listen to them. We want to make sure they've asked the right questions, that they've thought about them carefully and appropriately, that they've touched base with the right people within the organization, and gotten everybody's consensus on a decision.
You come to this position with a very strong business background, and yet you and I were chatting, well, we had lunch a couple weeks ago, and then we chatted again backstage, just about there's an element of luck in baseball. And I'm curious, from someone who has spent their career in business where you can control a lot of things, that to end up in this line of work where you can control some things but not everything. How do you deal with that?
Well, I think luck actually, Tom, enters into everything in life. It enters into your personal career, it enters into your organization's life, and it's obviously the people who work with you. I think you're right. There's more that can kind of go wrong outside of your control in baseball than there is in business. I mean, you think about the pitcher from the Indians who sliced his hand, doing a little home repair, right before the series. I mean, how does that happen? And think about the changes in Cleveland, misfortunes for Cleveland that entailed. That doesn't really happen in business. And if it does happen, you walk in with stitches on your hand, it doesn't really matter. Your business or mine is throwing a baseball at 5 miles an hour. It's hard. It's very hard to deal with that uncertainty and the capriciousness of that. There's a lot of expressions that speak to things like the harder I work, the luckier I get, which is partly true, but I think it really doesn't address the whole issue of luck. I think the harder I found, at least in my life, the harder I worked, the more I'm capable of taking advantage of opportunities when they present themselves, and the more, I'd say, sensitive and aware I am, alert to possibilities that there's an opportunity. But hard work also prepares you to deal with the inevitable bad luck you'll have in life. I mean, you may or may not have good luck. We're guaranteed to have bad luck in life. And so working hard, and then I think at the end of the day, you just have to understand that sometimes, and I talked to, obviously, he didn't fail a lot. Andy, one of the first things we were talking about when we were interviewing him was the famous Steve Bartman incident out in Chicago, and he looks at me and said, John, all these years later, I still have this hole in my stomach from losing that series. And to think that somebody sticking their hand out can turn an entire World Series.
Yeah, this wasn't a guy who struck out or something.
Correct.
Pulled a hamstring. This was just this random fan.
That's right.
Let's talk a little bit more about business. I know you've had a lot of highlights in your business career, but I think one of the things moves you made fairly early in your career was push to have your company acquire some brands from RJ Reynolds, and it was a way, I think, for your company to grow. But there was an element of risk in that, right?
Absolutely.
Talk a little bit about just sort of how the element of risk both in business, but also in some of the other areas that you've been involved with, and how you sort of balance some of that stuff.
So I think the first principle I have, Tom, is that I think the risk that you take needs to be proportional to the ability to achieve an important strategic objective. To the extent that you're achieving a very important strategic objective, you should be willing to take more risk, and to the extent that you should take less risk if you're not. But when I look at risk, I ask a series of questions, that being the first one. But I also ask, if I make a wrong decision, how quickly can I recognize the decision is wrong? How quickly can I take remedial action? What are the consequences of the wrong decision? How much time and effort and money do I have to spend in order to fix the wrong decision? And you also need to think about the information you have. What's the source of information? What's the quality of the information? How much confidence do you have in the information? And what information don't you even have at all? And then you need to start thinking about, well, how much time, effort, and money can I afford to spend acquiring the information I don't have, or trying to bring the confidence level in the information I do have up from, say, 75% to, say, 90%. But, you know, risk, the old adage, nothing ventured, nothing gained, is said for a purpose. I mean, it's an inherent process of business. You have to be very thoughtful about it. In the case of the R.J. Reynolds deal you mentioned, it was interesting because my father was adamantly opposed to it. He saw it as way too risky. He thought that we could bankrupt the company because in order to buy this much larger division than we were, we had to take on a lot of debt for a company our size. And I looked at
bankruptcy. When you're younger, and
absolutely huge. I mean, and, you know, I have a different approach and thought process about risk today than I did when I was 35 years old. And one of the conversations we had, I was actually 32, we bought 31 when we were talking about buying the company, those brands, and 32 when we bought. One of the things I said to my father, Tom, was, Dad, you've had your career. And he was in his early 60s at that point. I said, you've had your career, been successful. I said, this is not about you, this is about my future. And I need to do this if we're going to be successful and accomplish what I want to accomplish in my career. And I said, I literally looked at him and I said, I don't think you really have the right to say no to me. Fortunately, he agreed with that last one.
It sounds to me like you have taken a similar approach when it comes to philanthropy. So you and your wife have given away lots of money. But talk a little bit about sort of how you think about philanthropy and in what ways it's similar to business and in what ways maybe it's different from what you approach your business with.
So I think any well-run organization, be it nonprofit or for-profit, shares a lot of the same characteristics. You need great leadership. You need a visionary up there. You need somebody who has strategic vision, somebody who can translate that vision into a series of concrete, specific goals that are measurable, so the results are measurable and quantifiable. You need somebody who can assemble the team and get a group of diverse people motivated and moving in the same direction. Somebody who's persistent and overcomes the inevitable challenges and obstacles that you face along the way. But there's a significant difference in for-profit and nonprofit organizations in that nonprofits are really what they call mission-driven organizations. And that's fundamentally different than a company that's predicated upon making money and returning value to shareholders. You know, Martin Luther King once said that the arc of the moral universe is long, but over time it bends towards justice. But what you find when you work with the nonprofit organizations is that on a daily basis, those organizations are working to grab that arc and bend it towards justice. And when you achieve an objective in those organizations, that's a much different feeling, a sense of satisfaction and accomplishment than you get from, frankly, selling a few more cigars this year than you did last year.
One of the organizations that you've invested a lot of money in as a philanthropy is Project Home, where I think the number is more than $30 million, right? Talk a little bit about sort of why you've chosen to focus there and why so much. I mean, I know that there are plenty of requests for your support of things, and I think it would be easy to spread that money around in some way. So talk a little bit about why you've chosen that organization and why to that level.
Let me, if I can, take those in reverse order. When we started thinking about philanthropy in a serious way, we've always been philanthropically involved in both our time and our money, but once we sold the company and once I retired, we had much more of both available. And so, I sat down with my wife and we made three key strategic decisions up front. One was that we really wanted to find systemic, scalable, enduring solutions. We didn't want to just apply Band-Aids to something. We really wanted to try to solve problems. And we also thought about there's lots of worthy causes. There's obviously cultural endeavors to pursue, but we chose our focus to be on the vulnerable people of society, and we did that in part because we thought that's where our hearts led us, but also we thought that they were kind of underserved as a type of cause relative to some others. And then finally, the third big one was that we wanted to identify organizations and people in those organizations who already had a proven track record of success. We didn't feel that we needed to invent wheels here. We thought that we could look and find people who were already working in important areas, and that we could then support them with all of our resources, our time, our minds, as well as our money. So that's kind of how we distilled it. And then why homelessness in particular? So first of all, we invest in a lot more than homelessness. It's not just that's the only thing we do. It's certainly one of our signature efforts, but we have many others that are as deep as that is. But there's a couple of things. When you think about the great urban problems that cities face in this country, and in fact across the world, there's things like lack of education, lack of jobs, lack of affordable housing, lack of access to medical care, hunger. And when you think about homelessness in its broadest way possible, homelessness really touches upon each one of those problems. If you only want to provide a shelter for somebody, that's good. That's a good and worthy objective. You can do that. But that really doesn't address the root causes of homelessness. It doesn't address getting that person who you brought into the shelter that night to get them back on their feet and help them become self-sufficient. And it also doesn't help you prevent homelessness in the future. And that was real. When I talk about systemic changes, that's what I'm talking about. So working on homelessness, and it's really true. You know, the word home in Project Home stands for finding a home that's affordable housing. The O stands for opportunities for employment. The M stands for medical care, and the E stands for education. So Project Home has always been focused on and dedicated to holistically dealing with homelessness, so that they not only bring people in off the streets, but they get them back on their feet and make them self-sufficient, and that they're at the same time they're working to kind of minimize and ultimately hopefully prevent homelessness going forward. So that was very appealing to us because it really gives you the opportunity to work on all of these great problems.
Whenever I talk to venture capitalists, they always say when they're investing their money, they're investing in an idea, but more or less they're investing in an entrepreneur.
Absolutely.
So are you investing in
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, as I said, I think great leaders share common traits, whether you're working for a small or large organization. Your managerial behavior has to change depending on the size, obviously. But and it's true nonprofit. I don't even remember this time. I think it was 10, maybe 15 years ago. Philadelphia Inquirer did a poll of its readers of who was the best CEO in the region, and Brian Roberts came in second. Sister Mary Scullion came in first, and I mean that's the way she's viewed publicly. And with all apologies to Brian, because he's extraordinary. You know, I think even Brian might say took his hat to Sister Mary. She's an exceptional person. And when we first met her and talked to her, Tom, I felt like I was talking to the CEO of a business. We were walking down the streets of North Philadelphia. She had this magnificent way. We would walk past someone who was on the street, and she knew that person's name, and she'd stop and talk to them and encourage them to come into one of their houses or their shelters. And then, the next minute she's talking to me about the federal funding for affordable housing and how that you can finance that, and we're negotiating with a bank in Philadelphia to kind of get a loan based upon. I mean, it was just, she's up here and then she just kind of covers the whole bandwidth of what you need to do as a CEO, and I think that's critically important. There's a lot been written recently about my interest in analytics and numbers for baseball, but analytics applies to business and it applies to charities too. I mean, you have to have concrete, specific goals. You have to be able to measure your success as you move towards those goals. You have to know when you're on target and on schedule, and when you're off target and off schedule. And you have to then sit down as you do in business and say, okay, what are we going to do what corrective action are we going to take to get back on track and back on schedule?
You ever asked Sister Mary for advice on the Phillies? She's been a lot of stuff.
She generally gives it to me before I need to ask her. Which is not an uncommon experience.
Sure it isn't. Well, let's talk a little bit more about the Phillies. So you have seen the heights of 2008 and survived the stress of that euphoria. The team has sort of bottomed out, and you've sort of experienced the depth of that. As we're moving forward here, what is it that has you excited about what's to come?
So, I really, really like Andy McPhail and Matt and the people Matt's been adding to the baseball side of the operation. I think there's really a transformation in thinking that's taking place for the Phillies, which is very exciting. And you're already seeing results. I mean, there's different type of results, and they can occur at different places in the organization. I mean, the baseball team, the major league team, was better in 16 than it was in 15, demonstrably better. We won 8 more games. There's lots of specific statistics I can give you about the pitching staff or the hitting, the walks per 9 innings were up, the Ks, per 9 innings were up. I mean, they're better statistics. Not the walks were up, the walks were down. We're better relative to other teams. But the really exciting thing I think is taking place, Tom, is in the minor leagues. I mean, we had the worst record, the worst farm system in 2014. And last year, 2016, we had one of the great years of any farm system, of any organization. I mean, the winning percentage of the 6 domestic farm teams, which includes the 2 short season A-ball leagues, was 585, as I recall, 585. And the Yankees, that was the highest winning percentage since the Yankees posted a 597 in 2007. So, I mean, that's, I think about 9 years, 30 teams, that's 270 organization years. And out of those 270 years, the Phillies in 2016 had the best record. And we had 27 All-Stars across those 6 teams, which was tied with the Cubs and the Indians for second most, right behind the Rays, which had 31. So I mean, we've got a lot of talent down there, and that's really exciting to see that talent coming up.
You may see some season ticket sales after that.
I'm hoping so. I have some applications. I'm happy to take them.
Well, one of the things that changed, though, seems, is that you have a smart young general manager in Matt Clintock, and then have embraced analytics much more. In fact, you hired someone who used to work at Google. Talk a little bit about how that has impacted the organization and what you're actually doing differently.
Talk about specifically the hire or just the whole change?
We'll start with that hire. I'm actually curious. What does it back in Google do in the Philly organization?
One of the things I would want for any organization I'm a part of is to be what I call a learning organization. Because in a competitive world, whatever the reality is today will change, next week, next month, next year, 5 years from now. And you have to be adaptable. And you have to have your eyes open and to be open-minded to see change coming, to be able to adapt to change early on so that it doesn't whack you on the side of the head badly. And what I really, really like, and when I do that, when I talk to my people, I talk about looking at ourselves, looking at our competitors, but also looking outside the industry. And when Matt and Andy came to me and said that they wanted to hire this guy, I said, this is brilliant. I said, you're not hiring a guy from another team. You went outside the industry, you went to one of the best run organizations in the world. Depending on what day it is, it's the largest valuation of any organization in the world. And Andy Galdi not only comes in and brings a fresh way of thinking, he has a lot I think he can teach us about how does an organization like Google, which is obviously driven by technological change, which happens in a nanosecond these days, how does the organization stay on top? What do they do? What kind of philosophy do they have? What kind of management approaches do they have? To kind of stay on top of that wave, of those waves, to keep there's whatever they're going to do 5 years from now, they don't even know yet. They're going to figure that out 4.5 years, probably 4 years. And we have to be reactive and forward thinking like that.
One of the really interesting things to me about a professional sports franchise is that, yes, it's a privately held company, an enterprise, but at the same time, there's an element of almost a public trust in this.
Not just known, it's absolutely true.
So you mentioned that you get advice from a lot of people, and I'm wondering just how much do you think about this, that you are sort of the caretaker of this thing that probably will outlast you, and just how do you think about that part of what your role is at this point?
Well, I see myself as a steward. I don't really see myself as an owner. I guess technically I am, but to the point you just made, it's going to endure beyond me, whether that means it stays in my family or it eventually gets sold to somebody else. There's going to be somebody behind me, and they're a steward. And the object of good stewardship is to leave something in better shape than when you inherited, when you kind of entered the picture. So I think about that all the time. I mean, it's not a business where making money matters. That's not the grade on the report card. The grade on the report card is winning, and you have to be focused on winning. And I don't think anybody cares whether I make $1 or lose $1 or break even, but we have to win. So if I have to lose money to win, then you lose money to win. You know.
You're making a lot of fans here. That said, baseball is still a business, and we were talking a little bit backstage about sort of the state of the business, and you mentioned that Major League Baseball has this sort of media enterprise that is increasing in value. I'm curious how you see the game itself changing and sort of trying to keep up with the 21st century as all of our lives change. It's really interesting all those things for digital technology.
Well, there's been a lot of talk over the years about how baseball needs to adapt to become faster pace, and baseball's made some inroads in that. It's difficult to kind of pick up a lot of speed in a game where there's no clock on the field. I mean, it's just a reality. I mean, you can stand on a pitcher's mound for 4 days and not, it's like a filibuster in this Congress and never deliver the pitch. So we need to find ways to keep the game moving faster, and I think we've done some things and we're going to continue to do that. I mean, if you think about baseball versus football and basketball, basketball and football have made a lot of rule changes over the last 20 plus years, all designed to kind of improve offense. And that's designed to kind of make their games more appealing to their fan base. And so, we need to be looking at that. And I think you're going to see some changes coming up in the next few years.
How much do you have to balance out? I mean, there's the long-time traditional fan who says the rules of baseball have essentially been the same for 150 years and don't mess up with it.
You know what? I wake up on Monday and I feel one way, and I go to bed on Tuesday and I feel a different way. It's hard. I mean, one of the ideas that's getting some thought is the intentional walk, and that we're not going to deliver 4 pitches, and the manager kind of goes a step and goes like this, and the umpire says, "Take the base." It makes a lot of sense, but then every once in a while something crazy will happen where a pitcher throws a wild pitch and the guy in the third walks on with a time run, and you go, well, maybe that's not such a good idea. So.
We're just about out of time here, but I want to ask you to make a prediction about when the World Series championship will be returned to Philadelphia. See how close I can get you to prognosticating something here.
Well, if you look at there's 5 or 6 teams that have gone through significant rebuilds like we have recently. The Cubs, the Mets, the Orioles, the Rays, and you look at the Pirates. And when you look at those teams, you find that the shortest rebuild, the Cubs did it in 3 years. They had to say they had 3 losing seasons, and in the 4th season they were in the playoffs. The Royals took 6 years to have a winning season, 5 losing seasons, 6 years of winning season, but the 7th was the year they got into the playoffs. So that kind of gives you the bracket. 3 years, 3 to 4 years to get in versus 7 years to get in. I think we're probably towards the bottom of that scale rather than the top of that scale. But in the very short run time, it's all going to be dependent upon a few specific individuals. Does Aaron Nola come back healthy or not from his injury last year? Does J.P. Crawford advance? Did Thompson advance? Over time, as you get longer, it really is more about the strength of the organization, because you're going to have, among those 27 All-Stars we have down there, and by the way, those 27 All-Stars do not include some of the highest ranked players we have in our system according to Major League Baseball, or Baseball America even. So you're going to have surprises on the pleasant side, and you're going to have some disappointments on the downside. But over time, the system, if it's well run, should compensate for those.
John Middleton, thank you.